The German Chancellor has been out already this morning speaking on German radio RBB, and she's had some extraordinary things to say about Greece. She says she wants to keep Greece inside the Eurozone, but she doesn't want what she calls an uncontrolled insolvency in Greece. She'd prefer a controlled insolvency, whatever that means. And then she goes on and she adds that there's no procedure in the Eurozone for what she calls a controlled insolvency. We're joined now on the line from Athens by Daphne Matsiaraki of Sky Radio in Athens. Daphne, what are the Greeks making of all this?
Hello, Damien. Greeks are very divided. Public opinion is very divided. Politicians are very divided. And I think we are in a very urgent situation that the government is trying to do as much as possible in the little time it has, basically. Within the next few weeks, the government has to take strong, tough measures, the measures that have not been taken all this time. And these measures obviously are extremely painful for the Greek population.
Daphne, how much cash does Greece actually have left? Has it enough for another few weeks or a month or so?
Yeah, it's basically for nearly another month the cash that's left. There was in the past the talk of payments stop, payments freeze was not a case. Now it is a case. Within the government, ministers do actually admit that if we do not get the next installment from IMF and ECB, government has no money to pay for wages, for public services, basically.
They've actually stated this?
Yes.
Government ministers have admitted this, that they will run out of money to pay the civil servants' wages?
Exactly.
And when do you think this is likely to happen? In October?
Something like this. Basically, we have a few weeks left. However, everyone is rushing now. Today, there have been announcements that with the new measures adopted, harsh new measures for private property, housing property, that everyone has to pay huge taxes, homeowners. Every homeowner in Greece has to pay huge taxes for their property. Public television is shutting. Public sector is shrinking hugely. Wages are reduced by nearly 50% in the public sector.
50?
So, yeah, in some cases they reach reductions of 50% in the public sector. All these new measures until October, which means that if the government says that if everything goes according to plan, we will get the next installment.
And are people leaving their money in the banks, or are they taking the money out?
You are talking about the Argentina phenomenon now. I think that most Greeks are numb at the moment. They are waiting to see what is going to happen. No, there has not been such a movement yet. However, I think a lot of people have already done this in the past month. People with a lot of money in the banks have already taken their money away and put it in other bank accounts abroad, in other safer havens.
Well, that's the situation in Greece. You're listening to Lunchtime here on News Talk. The text line for your comments is 53106. We're joined now by an economist who predicted years and years ago in his first book, The Pope's Children, that the entire asset bubble, the huge and dangerous credit explosion in our country, was basically being financed by German money, and it would all come to a tearful end. And he reiterated this point over and over again, and nobody listened. David McWilliams, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Damien. How are you?
Now, you've heard what Merkel is saying today. She's saying she's allegedly trying to soothe the situation, but she says, I'll just quote to you, I've made my position very clear that everything must be done to prevent a domino effect. The top priority is to avoid an uncontrolled insolvency. These are direct quotes. She said there is no formal procedure in the Eurozone for an orderly default of a member state, but noted the European Union's Permanent Crisis Mechanism, ESM, that is due to come into force in 2013, if that's any use. She said She had encouraging words for debt-racked Greece. She said the Troika was doing everything to get the public finances back on track. And she was in direct contact with the Greek authorities. We're making it very clear through our channels how serious the situation is. That's a direct quote from AFP in the last hour. What do you make of all this?
Well, it's very clear to me, and I'm speaking as an economist, that Mrs. Merkel really is talking through her hat. She's faced with a big problem, right? She's trying to protect German taxpayers so that they don't pay for Greece. She's trying to protect German banks, number two, so that they don't pay for their bad investment in Greece. She's trying to protect German industry so that it doesn't have to face an overvalued exchange rate in the event of the euro breaking up. And all the while, she's trying to pretend it's business as usual. Now that, in my opinion, is a totally inconsistent quartet. Either the German taxpayer pays, in which case Greece's debts will be underwritten by Germany, or the German banks pay, in which case they pay for their bad investment, back to the bondholder argument that we've known for many years, or German industry pays. The euro breaks up, Germany becomes a Switzerland on steroids in the middle of Europe, where the currency goes through the roof and all other currencies fall against them. But the idea that it's business as usual and we don't want to uncontrolled default, we want to control default, and in some way we can actually preserve this, i.e. the German Chancellery can preserve this when the financial markets are going ballistic, is the type of politics that you only get in an ideological bubble, i.e. in the bubble that says we cannot think the unthinkable. And Miss Merkel, interestingly enough, is one of the few German leaders that isn't overwhelmingly and almost genetically absorbed by the European project.
But David, I want to just ask you about this idea of having Greece stay inside the Eurozone probably for political and ideological reasons while you had a controlled default. This would mean, presumably, that the Greeks defaulted to their own banks, who are the biggest holders of Greek public debt, and then to the French banks and to the German banks and the British banks, and they'd all be stung. Is that right? And that would be possible. How could that happen? And then we in Ireland and Portugal would be continuing to pay all our debts to these banks. Is that?
I mean, anyone who knows a little bit about economic history, your correspondent there in Athens mentioned Argentina. What is happening in Greece in the autumn of 2011 is exactly what happened in Argentina in the autumn of 2001. Precisely the same carry-on. The IMF comes in at the last minute, gives them another few quid to pay the teachers and the cops and the soldiers. They try to muddle through, interest rates go through the roof, the banking system collapses or at least entirely closes down in terms of a functioning banking system. The people then take their money out and the thing just implodes. By December 2001, that's exactly what happened, because I was working at the time in a fund that was involved in Latin America, and we could see this happening. Now, what is happening in Greece is precisely the same situation. Now, the point you make is very valid, that the Greeks stay in the euro, give the two fingers to everybody, default and start again, and you think that holders of Irish, Portuguese, Italian, Spanish assets won't say, well, once the Greeks have been given permission to default inside the euro, everybody inside the euro is going to default, and there would be complete and utter mayhem. Because why would you hold an Italian asset if you knew that already the principle of no default has been ceded in Greece under the same governance of the euro? You wouldn't.
Well, I want to put a hypothetical situation to you. If the Germans decided that there would be, quote unquote, an orderly default in Greece, and that could be ring-fenced to Greece and Greece alone, would that not involve some kind of equivalent of fiscal stormtroopers going into Greece and basically running the entire economy for the next 5 or 10 years or whatever?
Well, again, what is the mechanism whereby these fiscal stormtroopers go into Greece? Eventually the Greeks will say, which is, earlier on, we know that the Greek population is not going to get anywhere by increased austerity. We know that the Greek population is eventually going to say, well, hold on a second, this is complete nonsense. that we are prostrate in front of Germany for the next 10 years in order to pay for loans given by German and French banks to our government. Politics doesn't work that way. Eventually people say, that's enough. And the Greeks are hoping, I would imagine, that the Germans will blink first. That the chaos in Greece will be so... it is inconceivable that Papandreou and his mates aren't sitting around at night saying, okay, where is the exit strategy here for us? Will the Germans blink first? Merkel, of course, is playing hardball because she knows that her own political reputation is on the line. If you've been in Germany, I was in Germany during the summer, there's been a kind of a vicious characterization of Greeks and Greek people by the German tabloid press. And the Germans, whatever they feel about us, seem to feel very antagonistic towards Greece. And the idea of paying for Greeks from the average German seems to be a complete anathema.
Well, it's uncanny what you've just said, because we had George Hatzidakis on the programme yesterday, and he was of the view, he said, what's going on in Greece is extraordinary. Deceased pensioners are being paid. The finance ministry has insulated itself entirely from the pay cuts and so forth. But he said he believed that the Europeans would blink first because the Euro project would have to be salvaged. Do you believe the forces within Germany against that are becoming stronger and stronger and stronger?
Well, they are, because, you even saw it with your man going off in the huff. What was his name? Stark. I used to always love the way he was portrayed as this Teutonic hard man. And then eventually, when he didn't get his way, he ended up flouncing around like an Italian, going off in a big old huff, right?
Yeah, this is Jürgen Stark you're talking about, the chief economist of the European Central Bank.
Italians, but the general Teutonic image. And he doesn't get his way, he gets off in a huff. And in fact, his predecessor, Axel Weber, did the same thing. So the great thing about these hardcore German conservatives is actually they behave like children when they don't get their own way. And they resign, and off they go. It seems to me from, again, maybe travelling a wee bit in Germany during the summer and talking to Germans, that there's no appetite at all for blinking. So consequently, and then also you see...
So where are we heading?
Well, the Constitutional Court in Germany, that ruling last week was very interesting, because it explicitly said, we will make legitimate European interventions and us buying the bonds of other countries up until now, but hereafter you will need a vote in the German parliament for any extra cent of German money to be bailing out the Italians and the Spaniards and the Greeks.
And you won't get it.
And they won't get it. So you're at an impasse. And the Greeks are probably huddling down in Athens and saying, do you know what? These lads are weaker than us. If we just hold our ground, they will blink first. We will be able to almost hit the sort of Control-Alt-Delete on the keyboard and start again. And frankly, if I was sitting in Greece, the ramifications for Ireland, Portugal and Spain are Germany's problems, not the Greek problems.
Okay.
Because, if you think of, put yourself in the position of the Greeks.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's an extraordinary situation that's developing. Thank you very much for joining us, David McWilliams, on the Lunchtime programme.
It was useful. Now that, in my opinion, is a totally inconsistent quartet.
Now, France and Germany are due to make a joint statement on the Eurozone crisis later today. It'll be interesting to see whether it'll differ from what Angela Merkel said earlier. But Damien, this crisis is coming to a head quickly. What is going to happen next? Because a problem with Greece defaulting could soon start hitting us all in our pockets.
Well, that's exactly the point, and I think David McWilliams was correct when he spoke to us earlier in the programme. This is basically pie in the sky that she's talking. Just on the news wires, there's lines coming through now. Yields on Italian 5-year bonds hit their highest level since the beginning of the euro a decade ago at the auction this morning. Italy sold 4 billion worth of 2016 notes, that's 5-year notes, at an average yield of 5.6%. Just putting that into plain English, Italy had to pay more than it's ever had to pay since the creation of the euro for 5-year debt this morning. They were raising about 4 billion. They have to raise apparently 60 billion in the course of September to roll over their debt. The offers for the stock that was put on sale this morning by the Italian government covered the offer 1.2 times. This compares with an offer which was the previous offer, which was covered twice. So markets are deteriorating. What Merkel said to me doesn't make sense, Jonathan, because what she's saying, we don't want want to, well, it makes sense to a certain degree. She says we don't want an uncontrolled insolvency. That could result in a domino effect. What we want is a controlled insolvency. And
Can you
either
control
way,
an insolvency?
An insolvency is an insolvency. It means that the Greeks are going to default on their debts. It means that the Greek banks are going to be bankrupt because they are the biggest holders of Greek public debt. And it means that the French banks are going to take an enormous hit, and the German banks are going to take a very large but lesser hit than the French banks, and the London banks are going to take a hit as well. So everyone's going to take a hit. And it's not a fancy situation at all, talking about controlled defaults. And then, as you point out, the point you raise is, what about the contagion? This will spread. Well, if somebody gets burnt by holding Greek bonds, will they be willing to hold Portuguese bonds? And will they be willing to hold Irish bonds or Italian bonds or Spanish bonds?
So could all the good work that's been done by Ireland, all the good work that's been done here, okay, we didn't go out on the streets, we accepted the austerity as we went along, we've been patted on the back by the IMF and the EU for obeying all the rules, yet here we have Greece now saying they want an orderly default, they're going to get to default, all the good work that we've done could become unstuck quite quickly, and where does that leave Ireland?
Well, I don't know, you see, because there is no... Merkel admitted in her interview, which she gave to a German radio station called RBB this morning, she's really put the cat among the pigeons, because she actually stated on the record that there is no provision in European treaty law or in the legislation governing the creation of the Eurozone for an orderly default. So what she's saying is that there's no mechanism to default while remaining within the system. And it seems to me absolutely preposterous what she's proposing. She said there will be no default. The idea up to now is that the Central European powers could impose some kind of austerity programme on Greece and coerce them into repaying all their debts as they fell due by drip feeding them small amounts of money. That's the whole programme now. It's to me, she's thrown vast doubt on the whole thing, because her economics minister made a speech at the weekend, and he also is a guy called Philip Rossler. He spoke about he could no longer rule out an orderly default for Greece. So they've let the
oh, my head hurts listening to them.
Let the cat out of the bag, I think.